Today's story starts near a train tunnel. Beside the tunnel was a forest where workers were cutting trees, and one of those workers was Robert. Robert belonged to Idaho, but he never knew who his real parents were. When he was only 6 years old, the people raising him wrote one word, Fry, Idaho, on a piece of paper and put him alone on a train. When he reached that place, strangers took him in. Nobody ever explained why he was taken away from his parents or what had happened to them. To survive, Robert worked in a Chinese family shop. But sometimes officers would come and arrest Chinese workers to send them out of America. Because of fear and survival, Robert later started living with an old man. But one day that old man died unexpectedly, probably because of a wild animal. After that, Robert stopped going to school and began wandering from place to place looking for work. With time, without even realizing it, Robert grew up. He became a quiet man. He started spending time in church, maybe looking for peace, maybe looking for belonging. And that's where he met Gladys. The first time she saw him, she smiled and asked curiously, "Who are you? Where are you from?" Robert felt shy but answered softly. After that day, he enjoyed going to church, maybe more because of her. Their small talk slowly turned into long conversations, and within just 3 months, they decided to get married. After their wedding, they bought a small piece of land beside a river. They planned to build a wooden house there, and even decided where the windows and doors would be. For the first time in his life, Robert finally felt he had direction, purpose, and someone to call family. But life was still not easy. There was no work available nearby, so Robert had to travel far for labor jobs. Gladys was pregnant, so he had no option. He had to earn. He worked with people from many countries, China and others. Though they were strangers, they behaved like a family. They worked together, shared food, laughed, and supported each other. Later, Robert and the other workers were given a tough job, building a railroad bridge. The work was risky and tiring, but Robert did it because his family depended on it. One day while they were working, a group of unknown men came and forcefully took away the Chinese worker who was close to Robert. Robert tried to stop them. He shouted for help, but they pushed him off the unfinished bridge. He died instantly. Months later, the bridge was finally completed. Officials tested it by running an empty engine across it, and the bridge stood strong. People were happy because now travel would become faster. But Robert stood quietly and thought, in future, thousands of people will travel across this bridge, but no one will know that a man died here. And one day, another steel bridge will replace this one, and even this bridge will be forgotten. From that day, the memory of his Chinese friends stayed in Robert's mind forever. Finally, after months, Robert returned home. Gladys hugged him tightly. He saw his newborn daughter for the first time, and tears filled his eyes. He gave Gladys the money he had earned, and even brought expensive whiskey from the city. That night, Robert and Gladys walked near the river, talked, cooked dinner, and laughed together. Robert thanked God because for the first time, he had something he always wanted, a family. Life felt peaceful, but his sleep was no longer peaceful. Every night, Robert dreamed of the same man, the one whose death no one would ever remember. Sometimes Robert and Gladys traveled to the nearby city to take a family photograph, just so they could remember their daughter's childhood someday. But soon the cycle of life continued, and the lumber season began again. Robert worked with many new people each year. Most of them had no homes or families. He respected them deeply because they worked hard without complaining. Some of them barely spoke. There were workers who didn't say a single word for months. There was a quiet man named Hank who lived inside a hollow tree trunk instead of a proper house. And then there was Frank, who constantly talked about the Bible as if he knew every word by heart. But one day a stranger arrived and asked, "Where is Sam?" Frank heard the name, panicked, and ran. The stranger chased him and shot him. That's when everyone learned the truth. Frank's real name was Sam. Years ago, he had killed the stranger's younger brother because of racial hate and had escaped to the forest to hide. The stranger apologized to the workers and left. Among everyone there, one of the most unforgettable men was Arnie. Nobody knew where he came from, and he always picked the easiest jobs. But even his tasks were dangerous. He blasted tree roots with explosives and shouted loudly for everyone to cover their ears before he did it. Arnie loved to boast. He often claimed he worked harder in his youth than the entire crew combined. He said he once worked 23 hours in a storm, and even 60-degree heat didn't stop him. At night, he sang loudly and out of tune, and although everyone complained, Robert secretly enjoyed the songs he played on his little mouth instrument. The work never stopped. After finishing one site, they moved to another. The forest was disappearing tree by tree. Robert believed a true lumberjack always knew where a tree would fall, but one day a mistake proved him wrong. A giant tree fell in the wrong direction, and 3 workers died instantly. At Arnie's request, they nailed the boots of the dead workers to the fallen tree, so their memory would remain in the forest forever. That moment stayed with Robert. A quiet thought came to him. Maybe one day, this will be my fate too. When the season ended, Robert returned home. His daughter had grown, and being home gave him peace. He played with her, listened to her little stories, and cherished every small moment. But deep down, he knew he was only seeing pieces of her childhood, not the whole journey. This time, things were different. Gladys had learned to hunt and wanted to join him during work seasons. She planned to cook, wash clothes, and help the crew so Robert could stay close to his family. But Robert refused. He didn't want them to live in the dangerous forest. Seeing her disappointment, he looked for work closer to home. The pay was low, but he accepted it. He helped a shopkeeper named Jack with small jobs just to earn enough. Even though life was tough, time with his daughter made everything worth it. One evening, Gladys shared a new idea. What if we buy land in installments? We can start a farm and maybe build a small grain mill. Then you won't have to leave us anymore. It was an expensive plan, but Robert loved the thought of finally building something for himself. He told himself, just one last season, one more time. After that, I'll start something of my own. The next morning, Robert once again picked up his axe, looked back at his wife and daughter, and silently walked toward work. When he reached the job site, he noticed things had changed. The contractors had become stricter and greedier. They shouted orders and reduced wages if work wasn't finished fast enough. At night, the workers sat around a fire made from freshly cut logs and talked about the next work season. Arnie looked unusually sad. He said they had cut trees that were almost 500 years old, and if money wasn't necessary, he would never do such a job. Then he said a line that stayed with Robert forever. Trees have given us everything, but we cut them and turn them into wagon wheels. And then we act like gods. It was harsh, but true. Before the night ended, Arnie told Robert that he had worked with many people in his life, but if fate allowed, he would like to meet Robert again someday, because Robert was a good human being. Robert didn't know this would be Arnie's last conversation. The next day, a small broken branch fell on Arnie's head. The injury damaged his brain. Slowly, he began forgetting faces, then names, then himself. After 8 painful days, Arnie passed away. Someone whispered, Arnie never believed trees could take a life. But that's exactly what happened. But Robert felt something different. Deep down, he believed that branch was meant for him. The season ended. Robert took a train home and fell asleep. When he woke up, people were staring out the window. His hometown forest was on fire. Robert's house was inside that forest. When the train stopped, chaos was everywhere. People running, shouting, trying to escape the fire. Robert searched for Gladys in the crowd, but found no sign of her. He ran toward the burning woods but collapsed from smoke and exhaustion. The next morning when he woke, he rushed to check his home. Everything was gone, burned to ashes. Even his daughter's toys were scattered and blackened. Robert stayed there for days, hoping they might return, but no one came. Weak and heartbroken, he walked back to town. Jack, the local shopkeeper, gave him food and supplies. Robert returned to his empty land and waited until he was almost starving. One day, a wild bear passed by but didn't attack him, as if nature itself showed mercy. Loneliness became unbearable. Sometimes he talked to his lost Chinese friend in his mind, asking why his family was taken from him, but there was never an answer. The next morning, Jack appeared again with freshly hunted meat. Robert tried to say he would repay him someday, but Jack refused and instead took him hunting to help distract his sadness. Watching Jack hunt reminded Robert of Gladys. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "They're not coming back." Jack sat beside him quietly. With time, Robert built a small wooden hut on the burnt land. He survived on fish, mushrooms, and whatever nature offered. Yet a fear lived inside him. If they ever return, where will they stay? So he decided to rebuild the house from scratch. Nature seemed to watch his loneliness, because one day a stray dog and her puppies came and stayed with him. They became his silent companions. Robert worked slowly but steadily, cutting trees, shaping wood, rebuilding his home. Sometimes he thought he heard his wife or daughter calling him, but when he turned, there was only silence. Jack kept visiting in the evenings. They shared simple meals together, and every morning Jack left quietly like a traveler, moving through life. Months passed, and the new cabin was finished. At night, Robert lay outside watching shooting stars, remembering the past. Years went by. His family never returned, but he never stopped hoping. Loneliness eventually pushed him back into work, but now everything was different. Trains ran on steel bridges, workers used electric saws instead of axes. Old trees marked by past workers were being cut down without hesitation. Robert watched and thought, no one will remember the people who worked here, not even history. He was no longer strong. His body was slower, weaker. Age was finally catching him. One evening, an old worker approached him, Billy. Robert recognized him, but Billy didn't remember until Robert reminded him gently. Billy asked about Arnie, not knowing he had died long ago. Robert didn't tell him, because sometimes silence protects the heart. The two men sat quietly together, realizing how much things had changed. New workers had replaced the old ones. People no longer shared meals. Everyone lived in separate groups. Billy nodded slowly, and in that moment, both men understood. The world had moved on without them. Time moved on, and eventually Robert stopped working as a lumberjack. That's how life goes. New workers replaced the old ones. On his way home from one of his last shifts, he washed himself in the river and felt a painful fear. What if one day I forget my daughter's face? His body was getting weaker, so he looked for easier work. He rented a horse cart for $300 and began transporting supplies and sometimes passengers for a small fee. He stayed busy, but in his mind, Gladys and his daughter were always there, laughing, calling, living. One morning, he gave a ride to a woman named Claire, the new forest officer from Montana. She told Robert she had heard many stories about this place and shared something fascinating. 3,000 years ago, everything here was covered in ice. When it melted, a great flood destroyed everything. But nature returned and rebuilt itself. That's life's rule. Everything ends and then begins again. Robert quietly listened. Claire also told him she had once worked as a nurse in the army, but now helped prevent forest fires. Seasons passed and winter arrived. Robert struggled with nightmares and began losing strength. One night, he dreamed of Gladys running through a burning forest, holding their daughter, trying to escape, but failing. In the dream, she placed the child gently on the ground before losing her life to the flames. Robert woke up shaking. This was the first winter he had truly lived through here. Snow covered everything, beautiful yet harsh. Hunting and survival became harder than ever. When the snow finally melted, Robert visited Claire at the lookout tower. As they watched the sunset, she unknowingly said, "It almost feels like there was never a fire here." She saw Robert's expression shift and immediately apologized. Robert whispered, "Maybe they're gone, but I still hear them." Claire then shared her own loss, her husband's death, and admitted she worked here to avoid drowning in grief. That same night back at his cabin, Robert heard a noise outside. When he stepped out with a lantern, he froze. A young girl lay unconscious on the ground. Robert felt his heart stop. Logic said it was impossible, but his heart whispered otherwise. "My daughter, she came back." Her leg was broken, so he gently carried her inside, cleaned her face, and set the bone with trembling hands. She didn't wake. Pain couldn't reach her in that state. Robert sat beside her, watching her sleep, remembering her as a baby, her laughter, her small hands. Eventually, he fell asleep too. But when sunlight entered the room the next morning, she was gone. The window was open. Panic took over. Robert ran outside and searched everywhere, calling out until his voice cracked, but she was nowhere. Even after a week, he walked deep into the forest every day, hoping to see her again, just once. But hope was the only thing he found. Robert spent many days sitting near the window, waiting, hoping, but nothing changed. The loneliness was becoming heavy, almost painful. So in his old age, he sometimes took a train to Spokane, a growing city connected by tall steel railway bridges. The first time he visited, he felt shocked. The world had changed so much. Tall buildings, fast cars, bright lights. Everything felt new, loud, and unfamiliar. For the first time in his life, he saw a television. On the screen, humans were traveling into space. To him, it felt like magic. As he continued walking through the city, a man loudly invited everyone to watch a new theater show. Robert bought a ticket and went inside. While watching the performance, emotions filled him. His eyes became wet. The story on stage reminded him of his own life, his childhood, his work, his love, and everything he had lost. After the show, Robert stood in front of a mirror. He hadn't really looked at himself in years. Now he could clearly see the wrinkles of time, the evidence of a long, difficult journey. The world had moved forward so fast. Now for only $4, people could fly in the sky like birds. Robert hesitated, but then thought, maybe I should try it once. He saw an airplane, strange and new, and with nervous hands and a racing heart, he stepped inside. As the plane lifted into the sky, Robert looked out the window. From above, people looked tiny, almost like moving dots. And at that moment, Robert felt a deep realization. Every person in this world has their own story, their own pain, their own memories. As he watched the world below him, his entire life replayed quietly in his mind. His youth, his work, his love for Gladys, and the memories of his daughter. Robert closed his eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time in many years, he felt peace. Time did what time always does. It moved forward. Years later, in the month of November, Robert passed away peacefully in his sleep. No struggle, no fear, just silence. His small cabin stood for a while, but slowly, nature took it back, just like everything else. Robert came into this world quietly and left just as quietly. This story reminds us of something simple yet powerful. People come and go. Some names are remembered for a short time and then slowly disappear. So don't let life become heavy. Be happy. Create memories that make your heart glow. Because in the end, it's not success or achievements that stay with us. It's small moments of love, laughter, and connection. Life begins with the innocence of childhood, then continues through challenges, learning, dreams, and heartbreaks. Every phase shapes us. Every fall prepares us to rise again. So here's the final message. Time is moving, life is moving, and the world is moving too. If the journey feels difficult, remember, sometimes life breaks us only to build us stronger. If you want to share your feelings or thoughts about this story, the comments are open for you. Thank you for listening till the end.
अब आओ ना फिर से मिल जाओ ना फिर से जलाओ ना मुझे मिटाओ ना यूं दिल से अब आओ ना फिर से मिल जाओ ना फिर से जलाओ ना मुझे मिटाओ ना यूं दिल से कोई प्यार ना दे यूं जैसे मुझको चाहती है तू ज़माने के जैसी न बन मेरे यार जैसी है तू ज़माना जलाता मुझे लगाती गले फिर से तू मैं गिर के उठा हूँ अभी हर चीज सिखाती है तू मैं लिख आया कहानी अपनी जो बीती जिंदगानी अपनी जो खोया मैंने है वो खोया मैं रात जाग के हूँ रोया मैं लिख आया कहानी अपनी जो बीती जिंदगानी अपनी जो खोया मैंने है वो खोया मैं रात जाग के हूँ रोया 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 ख्वाहिश मेरी रह गई तुझसे मिलूं मैं कभी तुझको मैं प्यार दूं और बेशुमार दूं दिल तो जला है बहुत इसकी सजा है बहुत फिर भी तेरा ही रहा मेरी नहीं मानता जितना भी चाहूं तुम्हें मिलना है दर्द मुझे होता है क्या इस तरह कोई भी इश्क यहाँ तुम जो मेरी ना बनी किसको बताता फिरूं ये दाग दिल अपना किसको दिखाता फिरूं वक्त बदलता है सबका तुझको तो इसका पता था फिर मुंह क्यों मोड़ गई थी मुझको यूं छोड़ गई थी साथ निभाना था मैंने दिल भी जलाना था मैंने फिर क्यों मेरी ना बनी थी और ये सजा बन गई थी जिसको मैं जीता रहा था ये दर्द पीता रहा था ऐसी निशानी है तू ऐसी कहानी है तू मैं लिख आया कहानी अपनी जो बीती जिंदगानी अपनी जो खोया मैंने है वो खोया मैं रात जाग के हूँ रोया मैं लिख आया कहानी अपनी जो बीती जिंदगानी अपनी जो खोया मैंने है वो खोया मैं रात जाग के हूँ रोया 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 अब इसके पार है तेरा मेरा ठिकाना अब इसके पार है तेरा मेरा ठिकाना अब इसके पार है फिर तुझसे दिल लगाना अब इसके पार है।